Good morning, everyone. We'll call this meeting to order. Hello and welcome to the 25th meeting of the Standing Committee of Northern Affairs.
Ceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Before we get started, this is for committee members. Is there a motion to adopt the list of additional witnesses that was provided to you in the context of our fourth study? The clerk did not receive any others for this to add on to the list in the past week, so we will be proceeding with the list provided by the analysts. So could I have somebody with a motion to accept the witness list that was provided to you?
Mr. Batiste would like to intervene.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Batiste. There is a motion for it. All those in favor, please raise your hand or say yay.
Mark, can I just ask a question there? Sorry, I'm confusing my studies. Never mind.
Okay, all right. So it looks like a unanimous vote. So thank you for that. Alors aujourd'hui, on va continuer notre
Today, we'll continue our fourth study on Arctic sovereignty, security, and emergency preparedness of Indigenous peoples.
We'll be hearing from Mr. John McKierney, President and Fire Chief, Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. And also, he is accompanied by Tina Saradine, Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. And we are expecting another witness who may or may not yet be on with us, but we're going to proceed right away anyway. Chief April Martel of the Catlo-Dichi First Nation. Hopefully she will be online very shortly.
I would like to remind you of the Board of Internal Economy's requirements regarding physical distance and mask wearing.
I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members or witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are offered in English, French, and Inuktitut for the meeting today. Please be patient with the interpretation. There may be a delay, especially since the Inuktitut has to be translated into English first before it can be translated into French, and vice versa. The interpretation button is found at the bottom of your screen in either English or French or Inuktitut. If interpretation is lost, please let me know and we'll fix it before we carry on. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can also be used at any time if you wish to speak or alert the chair. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. And those in the room, well, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. This is to help the interpreters. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Un rappel que tous les commentaires.
A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair.
Commencer maintenant et notre façon habituelle de procéder, c'est que les témoins auront chacun 5 minutes pour nous adresser la parole et ensuite on procédera à une période de questions. So, without further ado,
Donc, sans plus tarder, nous allons appeler notre premier témoin, Monsieur John McKierney. Je ne sais pas. Oops.
Time with Ms. Saradine, but the two of you combined have 5 minutes for your opening comment, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your precious time for all of the committee. I will speak, and then I will ask Ms. Saradine to answer questions as well, if that can work. So thank you for inviting the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs here today. For the record, my name is John McKierney. I speak to you from the unceded territories of the Lillooet Nation and the Squamish Nation. I'm the current fire chief for the resort municipality of Whistler, British Columbia. Prior to that, I was the fire chief for the city of Vancouver and have been in the fire service for 42 years. I am the current president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, and I am joined here today by the CFC's executive director, Tina Saradine. Our remarks will focus on 4 key themes. First, Canada's Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, the importance of implementing the First Nations fire protection strategy across the country, general issues in the fire sector, and what an action orientation to problem solving in the North might look like. Canada's Arctic and Northern Policy Framework provides a reasonable starting point for addressing severe disparities and inequities in the North, impacting predominantly or primarily Indigenous people. It provides a vision essential for our Indigenous people, for a collective conscience of our country and our international security, a triple bottom line which increases the urgency of action. However, while it is a start, the chapter on safety, security, and defense and its objective 5 on increasing a whole of society emergency management capability in the Arctic and northern communities are high level. Unless we missed it, there is nothing at all on fire or how mitigation, response, or preparedness for emergencies or fire situations would occur. How might this be addressed? Next week, we will have the pleasure of partaking in a discussion with Mr. Haidu and the Indigenous fire chiefs on the First Nations fire protection strategy. It outlines priorities and specific goals framed within 6 areas. Number 1, partnership with the First Nations leadership and fire protection. Number 2, fire prevention education. Number 3, community standards. Number 4, fire service operation standards. Number 5, climate change. And finally, number 6, critical infrastructure. This is a thoughtful and well-conceived strategy that focuses on education for Indigenous leaders. They are the ones who make the decisions and allocate resources in their communities. If they are aware and empowered, they will make the right decision. The strategy also links fire safety and disaster risk reduction, which creates economies of scale. It calls for the implementation of fire smart strategies, which are essential given the increasing climate issues. Exceptional work has also been done on the creation of the Indigenous Fire Marshal's Office, now known as the National Indigenous Fire Safety Council. It has important principles for fire education, prevention, and funding for Indigenous communities. They still await the signing of the contribution agreements. Moving quickly is critical because in the North, implementation is significantly more complex than anywhere else in this country. In preparing our notes for today, we had the pleasure of speaking with the fire chiefs in Inuvik and Yukon who described how the absence of fire technicians and in so many fly-in only remote communities makes simple tasks like inspecting fire life safety equipment lengthy and expensive. A melting permafrost creates flood issues like never before, along with wildfire and grass fires. Housing situations where you have 4 or 5 families living in what was built as a single family home reduces its intended lifespan through greater wear, condensation, humidity, and just normal wear and tear. Finally, builders need to be held to account for the construction quality, which they are not currently because of funding, permit, and reimbursement issues. On the issues of critical infrastructure and climate change, you already know that the federal government is leading its Let's Talk Critical Infrastructure and Let's Talk Adaptation Strategy consultations. We recommend strong linkages between those learnings and this study. If 30 to 40% of Canada's collective critical infrastructure assets are in critical condition, we can only imagine that it's far worse in the North. There may be no infrastructure in some areas. This requires more than 3 levels of government that must collaborate. As an example, and in talking to the chiefs up north, the cost of water supply infrastructure can be as high as $10,000 per meter. These are difficult challenges, but there is an opportunity. Canada is the second coldest country in the world. We can be world leaders in how we live successfully, peacefully, strategically, and safely in northern and Arctic regions with and through the leadership of Indigenous communities. We need to have gear such as self-contained breathing apparatus that can operate effectively in these severe cold climates, water supply that is resilient, infrastructure that succeeds Arctic blasts, transportation systems that thrive in the cold, and even tourism that stimulates local economies. Finland seems to have taken this approach. The CFC was asked recently by the Finnish Fire Chiefs Association to partake in a study to tour the northern and Arctic countries' fire and emergency systems. This is costly, but Canada may be well served in investing in such a study program to aid in knowledge generation. While some issues in the North are unique to the North, there are other issues in fire and emergency management that are quite common to all rural communities in our country, and we would like to share these with you. First, a high reliance on volunteers in the fire sector is a precarious form of emergency response. The supply is also dwindling nationally. You may need to create incentives for fire technicians and fire professionals to experience the North and possibly subsidize transportation. It's the only way we can get expertise up there. Second, right across the country, and I imagine no less than the North, all hazards response training and equipment is falling behind the times. We recommended to the federal government to bring back something along the lines as the former Joint Emergency Preparedness Program, applicable to all parts of the country. And especially since new innovation and climate situations mean new training and equipment requirements in fire departments. Addressing this will require an economy of effort and investment. So please make sure the local communities are telling you what they need. How can all these issues that are common in the fire and emergency service be addressed not only in the North, but all across our country? We have recommended to the federal government that a structure similar to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the U.S. Fire Administration, be implemented in Canada. Recognizing collaboration with Indigenous communities would be essential. We believe the Secretariat be informed around the new Minister of Emergency Preparedness is a good start. We encourage maximum collaboration. In closing, Mr. Chair and Committee, I'd like to thank you for inviting the CFC here today. Your task is enormous, but full of promise for Canadians. We often say in the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, we stand on the shoulders of giants. When our Indigenous and Northern and Arctic regions succeed, we all succeed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKerney. Let me ask the clerk, is our second witness, Chief Martel, has she joined us, Madam Clerk?
No, she hasn't, sir. She might join the second panel. Apparently she's got her hands full with something.
Okay, very well. So given that we probably will only have Mr. McKerney and excuse me for a second, Ms. Saradine with us, we're going to proceed with the first round of questions. So without further ado, Mr. Shields, you're the first to kick us off. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. Fire Chief, you went through an incredible list, and I'm thinking here sitting, if we could implement 1/10 of what you said, we'd be achieving something. It was an incredible list. There was something, though, that I know there's a lot of money in that, and you know it as well as I do, and it's interesting. But you talked about builders, and you talked about accountability. And I'm thinking, well, there is something in the sense of a process that we should be able to do. We know it elsewhere. What's the roadblocks to doing that with the building in the sense of accountability? And could you just talk a bit about that?
Thank you, Mr. Shields. I'm at the risk of not being coherent on this. When we talk to our Indigenous leaders, there is a construct that happens in these communities whereby the structure of paying for this is complicated in such that there's not a lot of oversight, coupled with the fact there isn't a structure as we would have in normal communities in all the areas that we live, where you do have inspectors inspecting phases of the construction. That's gapping there. I will turn it over to Ms. Sardine if there's anything that I've missed to Mr. Shields' question.
Thank you, Chief McKerney. At the pleasure of the chair, Chief McKerney has explained it really well in other communities where there are significant government resources for permits and bylaws, and as Chief McKerney said, in inspections. These problems don't exist. So there's the compounding element of the structural supports within the Indigenous communities to be able to do those inspections and have those bylaws and resources in place. That would be in other communities. Also, as we understand.
Et comme nous comprenons, et comme l'a dit le chef, c'est quelque chose que nous a expliqué du Conseil de sécurité incendie des Premières Nations. Je ne sais pas si j'ai le bon titre.
And what steps are reimbursed in what order, which is part of what is creating the accountability. So we'd be happy to try and provide more information afterwards through letter, but we'll do it in consultation with the National Indigenous Fire Safety Council.
I appreciate that and appreciate any further information. It sort of reminds me of the situation when we talk about water and potable water, and that flows. Part of this in the sense of the water. We can build all the infrastructure in the sense of water we want, but unless we provide the necessary education and training, we are just recycling the process of building and rebuilding. So would this be similar in the sense that we need to then work at the education? I know it was the fire chief mentioned education as one of the number of lists that he had, which was fantastic. But education is a critical piece to this. If we can educate people, the capabilities there. We just need to understand that we need to provide the resources for the education so the capabilities then can be used and empowered, because he used that as well. Any response to that comment?
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Yes, I think your comments are spot on. We would refer back to the collaboration with the Indigenous leaders in all these communities. They are very different and they have very complex issue, and one size fit all is not there. So I think you're spot on with it, but the fine tuning would be through the leadership of those communities.
And they very much agree in the sense that we are not needing to write the rules, but we need to provide the resources, sense of education. When I look, and you're very familiar with fire halls all across this country with 80% volunteers, and I see many of the significant training that goes on, and I find different scenarios of training in different particular fire halls. When you're in rural, there is the cattle rescue unit. Now, you're not going to find cattle rescue unit in a lot of places, but in rural like mine, there it is. But that's what you're talking about. It needs to be built for the situation, thus the communication empowerment as they need it for their community. Anything more you would like to say about how we can do that?
If I may, I'm going to turn it over to my very brilliant executive director, Tina, to answer that question.
Thank you, Chief McCurney. I think you've said it well, Mr. Shields. The message that we've gotten in reading the strategy is that the decision making has to be in the local communities through the leadership of the governance structures there, and providing the correct information, almost as if those individuals would be the decision makers for emergency management and for fire, would require their education, the same education that one might have in the municipalities. So recognizing that those are the decision makers and that they would need the information to apply it to their local situation.
Thank you. You mentioned Finland, and I was going to ask until you had said that about, we've got the Arctic Circle Council out there in a sense, and you mentioned Finland. Is there any other of the Arctic countries that you have been involved with and communication with or know of besides Finland?
Tina, you want to speak to about? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, please. Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Shields, the Finnish Fire Chiefs Association has actually put together a study group. And so they have a number of their peer countries are together. So while we haven't had direct communications with them, we were discussing with them how we would organize information sharing. So it was really interesting when we had the chair from Inuvik and the chair from the chief from another one of the northern cities, it's escaping me now, but one of the comments that they made to the Finnish representatives was that, you know, it takes a very long time to have the transportation just to get from, say, Inuvik to Ottawa, much less to do these study tours, which are huge, and also helping them to understand the size of our country geographically. So one of the challenges is actually time, but also resources. And so one of the things that they had done was they had said, well, we'll pay for organizing the study, but everybody pays their transportation and their time, you know, from the office, so to speak, which was a challenge. So we haven't had a lot of discussions yet. We're trying to figure out what is the best way to do that, and is it the best use of resource and time at this point.
And that's an excellent point in the sense of the resources.
And thank you, Mr.
And I'm
Shield.
out of time. Thank you.
And we'll probably get back to it anyway. Mr. Pawlowski, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, and welcome, Chief. Now, we're used to having chiefs here, but not your kind of chiefs in front of our committee. And Ms. Saradine, I worked a few years in Norway House, which is a Cree community in northern Manitoba. And I remember one particular fire there where we had 3 kids come in with either burns or smoke inhalation that required them being on ventilators. And I know one of them, I'm sure, due to facial burns, has suffered his whole life because of that. And as I recall, the community said, when I talked to people like who got those kids out, and they said community members. I'm sure they must have had some kind of fire department, but at least they weren't the first responders there. So I know this is a really important issue. Norway House is a bigger community, probably big enough to have permanent fire services, I'm guessing, with 5,000 people. But a lot of the fly-in communities, they're small. They're 300 people, 500 people. And not only are they, and I think, Chief, you spoke a bit about it, not only do they have inadequate fire services, but there are also many of these communities subject to flooding at the same time. Now, how do we remedy this situation when you have small communities of, say, 300 people? They need to have people who can respond to health crises, to fires, to water, and you only have 400 people. You can't be an expert in everything. So any ideas as to practicalities of how to be better at responding to emergencies?
Yes, again, an excellent question. In my province here, we see that differential, that gap. We just recently released, we've had 59 fire deaths in this province in 2021, and a significant number of those fire deaths, unfortunately, is in Indigenous communities. So I think it really has to be hand in glove with helping them out with equipment and training, but also fire education. The communities have to wrap their heads around that for instance, a working smoke alarm. That's the best, the safest way to ensure their families are safe. And especially when you have homes that unfortunately have 3 or 4 families living in them. And try as we might as a fire service, national representative body of the fire service, try to get everybody to ensure they have working smoke alarms in their homes. It still is not being heard. And that's where we go back to, it's got to be at the leadership level of those communities.
Just on that, does Indigenous Services provide those communities with smoke detectors and carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide detectors?
I don't know that answer. I know we do it in some provinces. We do it in this province, but it doesn't reach. I don't believe it reaches to the Indigenous communities to the extent that it does in smaller communities in this province. So it's a gap, sir.
Ms. Saradine, I know you're an academic. In terms of policy solutions, like what policy options are there when dealing with small communities and getting them the emergency capabilities?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for the compliment as well. I hope I can live up to it. One of the things we talk a lot about, especially in small communities, is building right from the start. And as Chief McCurney said, the education piece. And so we have a wonderful program called the Fire Chiefs Ask, where we try, and this year we had the privilege of collaborating with Minister Blair on this, to have messaging go right out to the public, which helps them to know what are some of the strategies they can use. So you gave the example of flooding. How do you prepare your home when it's coming to flood season? Things that, many of us may not be aware of, that are strategies that are effective and useful, and getting those out in a way that's culturally appropriate, in the right language, at the right, positioned in the right way for the audience. I think those are very effective strategies. So thank you for the question.
Is given the fact that both forest fires and fires within homes are big threats to a lot of isolated communities, and given the fact that flooding is often also a big threat, are there any programs to train people from those communities in both those things, or to be more like a general practitioner in terms of emergency responsiveness, which would seem to me probably one of the only feasible ways of doing it? Are there such programs? I know you train firefighters. I don't know in terms of preventing flooding how you train people, but
yes, there is. And, the fire service in general is changing to meet the climate changes that we're experiencing. So it's again, in these smaller communities, to have people in the communities investing in their learning and their preparedness for this. But it does happen. Fire smart strategies is common across this country, and it's just as necessary in an Indigenous community as it is in a rural community elsewhere. I'll give you an example though of where we see promise. The last year in British Columbia, we had record-breaking wildfire here. Communities, I think there is in the terms of about 50,000 evacuations here. There was a significant fire up in the northern Kamloops region here called the Sparks Fire. And the BC Wildfire, who's responsible for wildfire, were not meeting the responsibility they should meet. And they quickly understood that they're not really including the Indigenous people in those communities. And so that discussion has gone on, and that's been recognized by the BC Wildfire, that they need the Indigenous people in these communities know their territory. They know they can get out in front of this stuff. So the will is there. It's just they got to be empowered and collaborated with. So that would be my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Pawlowski. On ira maintenant à Monsieur Sainte-Marie. Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
It's Mr. Sainte-Marie's turn. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So greetings to you, to all the committee colleagues, Mr. McCurney and Ms. Sariadin. Excuse my pronunciation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentation. And thank you for answering our questions. There's much content in what you've given us today, and that's highly appreciated. Just to start, I'm not a specialist in this field. I would like to know if the fire prevention services, the firemen services of the Indigenous associations in the North are members of your association.
I lost my French when I was 8 years old when I left Gatineau, so I didn't.
Okay, perhaps Ms. Sardine, perhaps you caught that. There's an interpretation button on your screen. If you put it to English, there will be a translation provided to you in your headset. There's a button there at the bottom of your screen that looks like a globe, and you hit that and you hit English, and then it gets translated into English. Okay, Ms. Sardine, perhaps you could give it a go.
Yes, thank you. Am I using the right channel for English?
Yep, yeah.
Okay,
you can go ahead and speak, yeah.
Yes. Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
Don't mind, Mr. Chair, I will respond in English. My French isn't quite as good. So yes, we have the absolute privilege and pleasure to have the National Indigenous Fire Safety Council, previously known as the Association of Aboriginal Firefighters Association of Canada, on the National Advisory Council of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. And so in our bylaws, we have individual fire chiefs as members. Chief McCurney is the elected president, and we usually have about 1,000 individual fire chiefs, but because we have so many small rural communities, we don't have every individual fire chief. And so the way the fire chiefs have addressed this in their bylaws is to form a National Advisory Council, which meets every month for 2 hours. There's a representative from every province and territory, as well as from all of the national affiliate organizations, such as D&D, the Canadian Volunteer Fire Service Association, the National Indigenous Fire Safety Council. So, for example, when we prepare for a study like this to partake, and we appreciate the invitation, we would have the opportunity to sit down with our National Advisory Council members from the North and the National Indigenous Fire Safety Council representatives from the National Advisory Council.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Your answer is very clear and very enlightening. Mr. McCurney, if you can now hear the interpretation of my French words, Mr. McCurney referred to the issue of reimbursement. At this committee, the chief of the Manawan-Atikamekw Committee brought up this issue of reimbursement. So that brings us to the issue of governance. In the community a few years ago, there were forest fires and the flames were getting closer to the community, and because they didn't have adequate services, the community chose, if I remember, they bought some pumps that they installed in the lake near the community in order to be able to spray water on the community and on the flames coming to it and avoid the worst. And what they told us is that once the fire was controlled, the community approached the federal department here and they said, no, this kind of expense was not eligible. So on paper, the federal government seems to recognize governance. Then you're in a crisis situation. It's a unique case. You're near a lake. The flames are coming closer. You choose to buy the pumps. But it's the governance. So then your decision is not confirmed and it's refused. Your members from Indigenous people and people in the North, what kind of a situation are they experiencing with this issue of governments and reimbursement of expenses so that they can assume the choices that they make? So what have you heard about this topic? Mr. McCurney had briefly alluded to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yes, we have. I don't think that's strictly just with Indigenous communities. This is a learning curve for the provinces and the federal government to work together on. Right across this country, though it's a provincial responsibility on the wildfires, it is kind of a patch quilt sort of approach as to how the funding is dealt with. Specifically to Indigenous community, it's complicated in my I'm going to show my ignorance, but my understanding it's complicated that much more because of the governance structure, and that's precisely what we're hearing from our Indigenous leaders in the fire service.
Bon, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So your answer shows that there's a problem in terms of the application or the implementation of governance. So in my experience, what I hear from people from the First Nations in terms of governance as opposed with the policies, well, the federal government and the provincial government each throws the responsibility to the other. And so in reality, it is different, and your evidence is supporting this. So I think at the committee we will have to focus more on a very efficient governments. How much time do I have left? Unfortunately, you have no time left, but there will be a second round. So thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses. And now we will go to Ms. Idlout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. First, those who are giving this presentation, welcome to this committee. Your report and your presentation is very interesting. Firstly, I will ask, I was recently in Igloolik, one of the communities that I represent. I was told, and it's in the high Arctic region in Baffin Island, and I was told what they are thankful for the new truck arrival. The mayor and the council whom I met with the mayor and the council members stated to me that they are very grateful for the new fire truck that will be arriving in the next sea lift. However, they are very concerned about no warehouse to put the fire truck in, as current warehouse needs millions in repairs. I want to understand how important is it to keep fire trucks in warehouses in extreme temperatures? Should the warehouse have been funded at the same time as providing the new fire truck before its arrival or at its arrival?
Thank you. Yes, it is vital. But the only functional way to deal with an emergent response related to fire is to have the equipment ready. A fire truck has water in it. You can't leave it outside, especially in Arctic temperature, without water. It's not going to serve you. So fundamentally, it needs to be indoors, heated, and it needs to be plugged in. That's typical of all fire apparatus across this country. And so I hope that helps you.
Thank you for your response. I understand that you represent the firefighters. Have you worked with government agencies on wildfires or Arctic climate, and if they are arriving new equipment to address fire issues, fire trucks? Have you worked with them on how and what should be done and prepared? What preparations are needed, and have you shared those with the high Arctic or northern communities?
Thank you. Yes, we do. We work through, as the national body, we work through, the leaders of the territories, of the provinces and such, and we work with, we assist them so that it actually touches all three levels of government. We believe we're a trusted advisor for the federal government in this regard, and we work with the provinces, and thus they work with the municipalities. And I would ask Ms. Saradine to follow up if there's something further I missed.
Thank you, Chief McCurney. I think you covered it. Thank you.
Once again, thank you. My last question will be regarding the Canadian Arctic. The Canadian Arctic has unique needs. Excuse me. Once they know that the truck is arriving and needs a better warehouse area, how and what should we do to repair it during the summer so that it's ready for the winter? Can you help them find funding or resources to address this before the winter? The warehouse needs to be repaired for the fire truck to work.
I'm stumped at how to help you. We're working with our Indigenous leaders in the fire service through the national body now, and the all too common comments are before us. I can assure you that our time together here will go back through Ms. Saradine and back to our Indigenous fire marshals and actually, it's not just in these areas; it's elsewhere. But I understand the immediate need there. I'm sorry, that's the best I can offer at this time. Tina, is there anything you can suggest?
Thank you, Chief McCurney, and through the chair, thank you for the question. As Chief McCurney said, we're not clear on the mechanisms for the funding when it comes to the Indigenous communities. You all understand that much better than we do. One of the things that was successful in the last year, and again, I don't know if it applies to Indigenous communities, so please forgive my being naive, But something that was very positively experienced across the country was allowing fire departments to have their projects be eligible for funding from the former gas tax fund, now the community Building Canada Community Fund. That was something that didn't happen in the past. And so it happened over the last year, I believe, province by province, territory by territory, and allowing that application from fire departments for their infrastructure funds to be eligible for that former gas tax fund, Canada Community Building Fund, was a really positive development and something that we want to thank all of you for. So I don't know how it applies to all communities, but I hope it does apply. And certainly, like Chief McCurney said, if there's anything we can do, we're just, you know where to find us. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Laut. We'll now start a second round. We'll go as far as we can. I have Mr. Schmale first up. Mr. Schmale, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our two witnesses here. My question is going to continue on the path that Mr. Shields had taken regarding builders, partnerships with the federal government. I guess you were talking about partnerships with the federal government in terms of ensuring builders are living up to their kind of end of the deal, if you will. Maybe you could expand on that and specifically what I'm kind of trying to narrow down to is especially off reserve specifically, municipalities are responsible for building permits. You have provincial building codes. How are the feds involved? And maybe I'll start with that and I'll get to my second one.
I'll, if you don't mind, Tina, I'll give it a start and ask you to come in. What's been explained to us, if I understand them correctly, what's been explained to us by the Indigenous Fire Marshals leadership is that in some of these communities, they don't receive funding until the project is done. So there's a need, and the band, as I understand, if I can use that term properly, has to fund it first, and that there's a problem with that construct, and sometimes it leads to accepting substandard construction, and so those are the type of areas they've explained to us that's a problem. They've also explained that, and that's why they're trying to promote the First Nations fire strategy. I don't think I've caught that quite correctly, but and I think this committee is understanding that, accepted that. So by that would be the bylaws would allow for, or the structures would allow for, inspections similar to you have in every other community. They have to meet a certain threshold, that there is, annual inspections, safety inspections, and such.
So when you said substandard construction, it's probably, in that case, it's more of a cash flow issue. They're more cutting corners, trying to deal with the money they have.
That's one element of it that's been explained to us. Yes. Tina,
okay.
And Tina, is there anything you can add to that?
Thank you, Chief McCurney. Yes, through the chair, the other piece is the enforcement piece, and I think you had already mentioned it. So just those two pieces, the funding and the enforcement.
Now, in terms of the inspections, what jurisdiction would that fall under? Do you know off the top of your head?
As we understand it, it's not in the same. They don't have the same processes in their communities. They're autonomous, but there's a gap in those regulations, those enforcement needs, and that's a problem.
Okay. Is there also an issue with building material as well? Building material that might be more flammable than others just to cut costs. Is that an issue as well, or is it? Well,
sorry to cut you off. Yes, the issue is probably not so much the material, because we see that in a lot of communities, but where the corners are cut, where there's no fire blocking, where there's gaps, where again, the worry on any of this is the travel of smoke and fire, and in a structure where it can get hold and it can travel and run. Modern day, building materials and modern day furnishings, it shows us that we have roughly 3 minutes to effectively get at that fire. Short after that, it's certainly gone past the room of origin. It's involved the whole structure. So, can't say enough about at the very minimum working smoke detectors throughout these structures to get the people out. The houses can be rebuilt. It's a very difficult time in everybody's lives when that happens, but at least people can get out and get out safely.
Okay, Chair, how much time do I have?
You have about 25 seconds.
Okay, maybe this will be just quickly, just your thoughts. The last year was tough with some of the wildfires out in British Columbia. What kind of conversations are you having with your provincial counterparts in different parts of British Columbia, or even right across the country, on measures and things that can be done by all levels of government to help reduce the risk of wildfires in the future?
Thank you. And we see, I'm going to let Tina express on that a little bit further, but we're very fortunate to see in some of the mandate letters and some of the work the federal government is moving forward with is really looking at a national perspective as it relates to WUI, the wild urban interface issues. There's some funding that's going, I think it's about 34 million. Tina, you can correct me on that, but it's trying to connect the dots between what is a wildfire is provincial responsibility. A structure fire is actually municipal responsibility. So having oversight by the national body, by the federal government, to have consistent training as it relates to wild urban interface fires. It's different than a house fire. It's different than a structure fire. To have the consistent training and equipment and readiness in our communities is key. Tina, your comment?
Thank you, Chief. And I know we have brief time, so I'll just add to that, the application of fire smart principles right across the country in all communities. These are principles that help people prepare their homes in events in areas that are at risk. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmale. I will now go to Mr. Weiler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also very grateful for the service of both of our witnesses and all you do to keep our country and our community safe. And of course, Chief McKierney for keeping Whistler safe as well. As part of the budget this year, there's a significant investment of over $500 million to fight wildfires. And as part of this budget, there's funding to train 1,000 additional firefighters, as well as to incorporate Indigenous traditional knowledge in fire management. So my question is, how does the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs work with Indigenous leadership to incorporate traditional knowledge in fire management? And what advice would you be able to give this committee on this topic?
Thank you, sir, for your question. One area that we believe strongly in that could really support the disconnect between what is municipal responsibility and regional responsibility to the federal government is through the Secretariat. Creating a similar responsibility embedded in the federal government that looks at all these pieces, and especially this piece, similar to the U.S. Fire Administration or the FEMA, federal. They have their structure, but they're embedded right with the federal government, and that's what the CFC has been working towards to see if that is something that's palatable, because we believe it is a way of better connecting the provincial fire, leadership and responsibility to the federal level. So that would be one area for myself. Tina?
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for the question. Through the chair, I would add to that, the importance of, and Chief McKierney already alluded to it, so I'll just expand on it a little bit more. Through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Agency, being able to connect all of the players and all of the protocols with, obviously with Indigenous practices and the knowledge that our Indigenous communities bring. The real risk is doing these almost legacy opportunities in silos. So one of the challenges is if we're going to have these 1,000 firefighters trained, we need to have the full team determining how that's going to happen. So there may be this idea that you can train individual firefighters as individuals. Well, you need the departments involved. You need the equipment involved. We've already talked about what happens when there's a disconnect between infrastructure, equipment, and training. And so you need that intersection of all of the pieces, the chiefs, the fire chiefs, the individuals, the communities, the resources. And so opportunities to expand organizations like the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Agency with all of the players would be very helpful. We have instituted a new climate committee at the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, and that is looking at those issues further, and we can provide further recommendations after the meeting as well if there's interest. Thank you.
I would venture to say there's definitely interest. So if you could please submit that in writing afterwards, it would be much appreciated. Earlier on, you mentioned some of the barriers that are faced in having specialists in remote areas, such as fire technicians, and possible incentives to be able to recruit more people to do that work. And I'm just curious how you'd approach that in Indigenous communities. Do you see there more being opportunities to train locally, or rather do you see there being a need to train and bring someone from outside the community in to provide those services?
Thank you. Ideally, to have people in the community that have the desire and the capability of learning these. So obviously, it would have to start with an external, mentorship of some sort. You take, as was mentioned about the fire truck. Fire trucks are no different than any other, vehicle. They need constant care and attention to keep them operating properly. So you do need members in that community to take on that responsibility, and that'd be right across, all the communities. So incentivizing communities to be self-autonomous and to be able to take these on, I think, is the most practical way to move forward on that.
Thank you. And maybe just last question, because I can see my time's running out here, just on the critical infrastructure piece. We've heard from witnesses prior to this in this study, the major issue with having one access road. And so when you're approaching looking at infrastructure, I was hoping you could just kind of speak a little bit more towards some of the issues about access and how we might approach that as part of the two consultations that you mentioned that we're leading right now.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's, there's I think we see it in BC. I'm not sure of all the other provinces, but every community now has to really put forward a wildfire defense plan, and that speaks to evacuation. That speaks to the one way in, one way out. Those are unique to each of those communities. Whistler's no different. Whistler, it's 15,000 people. Residents, and then you double that at least when tourists come to town, and we've got 2 or 3 communities that has one road in and out, and so this is a work in progress. The Juniper Fire in Kamloops last year was exactly that. It was a mayhem when that thing took off. It was just a matter of minutes. I talked to the chief there and trying to get people out of there. Well, you can't have everybody converge and try and get out of that large neighborhood. You have to make some decisions as shelter in place for certain areas of these areas. So it's not a one size fits all, but it takes good coordination to complete.
Merci, Monsieur Weiler. Nous irons maintenant.
Thank you, Mr. Weidler. Mr. Sainte-Marie, you now have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Garneau. So again, for Mr. McKerney, Chief McKerney, I would like to talk to you about the complexity of the implementation of intervention strategies that are specific to the North. You did refer to them. It's far, it's complicated, it's cold. You talked about roads. The infrastructure is not always in good condition. How can we do better? What advice could you give the committee here that would help minimize these complexities? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. My mind goes to this committee embracing at least a very high level baseline set of recommendation or expectation as it relates to preparedness, education, and response. Working, of course, in collaboration with the Indigenous communities and the provinces. And I think the leadership that can be shown from this committee and from the federal government that now embraces how the National Fire Service or how the fire service across this country, which are municipally responsible, how the federal government can really aid in having a common text right across, including Indigenous communities.
Donc, si je vous ai bien...
So if I understood you clearly, and thank you for this answer, I would have thought rather that the strategy is not applied wall to wall, but there are strategies that are specific to each reality. Could you comment on that in the remaining time that I have? Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you. Absolutely. When I say that, I meant high level from the federal government, looking at the uniqueness in collaboration with the community leadership that's there, because it is very unique. Each community is unique in some manner. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
Ms. Eadlout, you have 2.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I had one more question, but my colleague already asked it. Chief Keener, I enjoyed your report. It's proactive. You've done a lot of work. You said more people need to be aware of the things that you outline in urban and Arctic communities. For instance, you said we have to work with Indigenous leadership. We have to work with Indigenous communities and the leadership. I'm very happy to hear that. Those who are not Indigenous and non-Indigenous, how can you convince them, and the government as well, the importance of networking with the Aboriginal leadership and the communities? Because I don't see that as a need. They come in and they do their job, forgetting that they have other people living in that very area. How can you work with non-Indigenous leadership and managers to get into that attitude of working together with the Indigenous community and the leadership?
Thank you for your question. I think it's through this committee. I think the power of this committee, with the caring nature that you put in this, can set that tone. As I said earlier in my, as an example, in British Columbia, the BC Wildfire Service has never really looked to the Indigenous communities and the people in those communities being the ones they should go to deal with, in this case here, a wild urban face emergency. But in fact, they've learned that lesson. And in fact, they're encompassing them in as part of that organization. So I think that's a small window into that being recognized, and that should be replicated quite strongly across this country.
I guess just very briefly, I would love to hear your personal story of how you've come to this important view of having such great values in ensuring that more people work with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, because it's not very often that we hear regular Canadians talking about the importance of working with Indigenous leadership, and I would love to hear how you came to that realization.
Well, thank you for that. I've had the distinction of working for the City of Vancouver, and its value set as it relates to embracing and reconciliation, including Indigenous people in what we do. I've been, as a fire chief, I've been involved with a number of opportunity there to listen and be proud to take part. As I shift into my other roles into Whistler, no different there. I don't know about the other provinces, but I can tell you BC, and with the unfortunate situation that we're going through right now with the residential school issue, but over the last decade, the growing respect for the Indigenous population is it's made me a better leader. And I think it's made us a stronger community. I know it's made us a stronger community. And I think that's only going to grow. My work with Tina and the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs is replicated there as well. So thank you.
Thank you. This brings our panel to an end. I'd like to thank on behalf of the committee, Fire Chief McCurney, as well as Ms. Saradine. Your testimony was very important today. Obviously, the issue of fires, whether they're wildfires or whether they're fires in people's homes in remote communities, are an extremely important issue that this committee is seized with. And we do appreciate you taking the time, answering our questions, and this will be very useful input to our study. So thank you again. And with that, we will suspend very briefly in preparation for the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members.
Thank you.
Welcome our two witnesses for this next panel, Professor Whitney Lackenbauer from Trent University, as well as Mr. Anthony Moore, First Nations Emergency Services Society. Just before we begin, just a reminder to the two witnesses that you can speak in the language of your choice. And in terms of listening, well, for you, Mr. Moore, on your device, there is an ability to hear in English, in French, or in Inuktitut, depending on what you wish to hear it in. And for you, Mr. Lackenbauer, your virtual on your Zoom screen, you'll see at the bottom that there is a small globe signifying interpretation where you can choose which language you wish to hear, because all three languages will be spoken during this panel. So the way we proceed is that each witness begins with 5 minutes of opening remarks, and I would ask you to stick to the 5 minutes, and then we follow that with a question period. Alors, sans plus tarder,
Without further ado, we will begin with our first witness, Professor Whitney Lackenbauer.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you. Can I just confirm that the interpreters can hear me? I know we had some issues earlier in the week. Good to go? Great.
I see the thumbs up from the interpreters.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm very honored to appear before the committee today from my home in Oxford County, which is on traditional Anishinaabe and neutral territory covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. By taking the time to acknowledge the land that I stand on, I remind myself of the long history of silencing in this country and the need to speak the truth on a journey towards reconciliation. Your current study on Arctic sovereignty, security, and emergency preparedness of Indigenous peoples covers a lot of terrain near and dear to my heart. So I'm just going to touch on a few topics in my opening statement. First, in terms of Arctic security writ large, the framework that I typically employ to conceptualize Arctic threats is one that differentiates between threats that pass through the Arctic, threats to the Arctic itself, and then threats originating in our Arctic. And I want to focus my opening statements on threats in the Canadian North, most of which I see as related to our ability to respond to humanitarian and environmental emergencies caused or exacerbated by climate change, from tundra fires to wildfires to melting permafrost and coastal erosion to flooding and landslides, as well as risks amplified by heightened human activity in the North, such as pollution and spills or maritime and air disasters. My team adopts an all hazards approach to identifying measures to anticipate, mitigate, and respond to risks in remote communities and austere environments. Our focus is on how we can improve whole of government and intergovernmental responses and work towards more holistic whole of society approaches to build resilience and enhance emergency management. Canadian Rangers are an example of a community-based capability within the Canadian Armed Forces that provides important grassroots local responses across the spectrum of risk. First, full disclosure, I'm Honorary Lieutenant Colonel of the 1st Canadian Ranger Patrol Group, which spans our 3 northern territories, and I'm a huge proponent and promoter of the Rangers. I see the Rangers as a distinctly Canadian military solution that embraces Northerners and Indigenous peoples as the heart of what's needed to encourage and leverage subject matter expertise, capabilities, and local relationships in ways that are attuned to both community and national needs. The Rangers serve as the eyes, ears, and voice of the Canadian Armed Forces in remote regions. They guide Southern-based soldiers who deploy to our north. And due to their presence and capabilities, Rangers regularly support other government agencies in preparing for, responding to, and recovering from a broad spectrum of local emergency and disaster scenarios. Over the last couple of years, Rangers were a key component of Operation Laser, which is, of course, the military's response to COVID-19 in isolated communities, while continuing their established roles in responding to heavy flooding in places like Lake Vermilion and Hay River and Kashechewan, evacuating communities threatened by forest fires, responding to plane crashes, and supporting ground search and rescue. And we should note that residents of Canada's remote regions, particularly Indigenous peoples in our north, already serve in the military in very high numbers per capita as Rangers. One straightforward way of bolstering emergency management in remote communities is to improve the coordination between the Rangers and other first responder organizations, such as Canadian Coast Guard Auxiliary, volunteer search and rescue organizations, Indigenous Guardians programs, and volunteer firefighters. Relationships are key. Better horizontal and vertical coordination of the diverse array of actors involved in security and disaster and emergency management means embracing a multi-sectoral approach and changing how we talk and work together across jurisdictional boundaries before, during, and after emergencies. I echo previous witnesses before the committee when I call for greater clarity about who is responsible for what aspects of emergency management, what capabilities exist at local and regional levels, how these capabilities might be better integrated and coordinated, and where there are gaps in our processes that must be addressed. We have positive examples of successful communities of practice, like the Arctic Security Working Group, co-chaired by Joint Task Force North and the Territories, which works well at a pan-territorial regional level. But we still face major challenges in information sharing between departments and agencies, between governments, and with local actors. This interagency and inter-asset information sharing and coordination was a major theme and recommendation of the Newfoundland and Labrador public inquiry respecting ground search and rescue for lost and missing persons, led by Commissioner James Aguilarte of Labrador. In my view, improved information is a key opportunity space that can be acted upon immediately. but this does require a cultural change in how federal actors think about their role in not just ingesting relevant information for federal purposes, but also providing information to first responders at the speed of relevance. One possible initiative that could help to synchronize different lines of effort would be implementing an Inuit Nunangat Community Public Safety Officer program, which Calvin Peterson, who you're going to hear from next Tuesday, myself and our colleague Dr. Peter Kickert have proposed. This would provide communities with officers responsible for search and rescue, all hazards emergency management, fire prevention, land and marine safety, and emergency medical assistance, all integrated under one hat. And I'd be pleased to discuss this in more detail in question and answer if you wish. Finally, I see important opportunities related to strategic infrastructure investments that align defense and security needs with the well-established priorities of territorial, provincial, and Indigenous governments. Priority areas include communications, both broadband and satellite, improvements to airfields, port and harbor facilities, and sensor systems that enhance our domain awareness in both the environmental and human dimensions, and addressing infrastructure deficits in the north that create vulnerabilities in the security sphere should be synchronized wherever possible to also address persistent social health and economic inequities in the region. So to wrap up, relationships are key. Indigenous peoples and Northerners are key to local solutions to meet evolving human and environmental security threats in the north. And we need to better share information in anticipation of emergencies, during emergencies, and in discerning lessons afterwards. All of this is contingent on more fully adopting whole of government and whole of society approaches to emergency management, which will bolster resilience, security, and sovereignty. And when we come up with a sober appraisal of the security situation in the Canadian Arctic, I hope that we will align smart investments in Arctic defense and security with civilian priorities and assure that they provide multi-use or military and civilian benefits wherever possible. Thank you. Merci. Koyanamik.
Thank you, Professor Lachenbauer. We'll now go to Mr. Anthony Moore. Mr. Moore, you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Theory Creative, for bringing us this day. I wish to thank you all for the invitation to come today. It was a little short notice, and I don't have everything fully prepared. But regarding finesse and the work that we've been able to do over the last few months regarding emergency management, a lot of it stemmed from the specific work that came from mainly the floods and fires that have occurred over the last 5 years, and in particular, the atmospheric flooding that occurred over this past winter. And a lot of the work that Finesse has been able to accomplish stems directly from working with those communities directly affected and having the support of our staff and being able to pull in staff on a short notice to be able to reach out to those communities and give them the supports that they were lacking, given the rapidness of the incidents themselves. What we are looking to try do over the next few years, as we just completed our strategic planning this past winter and going through a current restructuring of Finesse to better align ourselves with the 4 pillars of emergency management. So this action that we're taking, we are hoping aligns with the goals and strategies of what both the province of British Columbia has planned, as well as what the government of Canada has planned for responding to emergencies across the province. We've had the ability to witness firsthand, and myself in particular personally, in these disasters, the effects the communities are still going through at this current stage. There's many communities that are still displaced with very little plans in place in the recovery side of it to ensure that they have a plan that they can understand to be able to get themselves back home. In addition to that, in areas such as the Lytton fire, where the entire community was devastated by fire, we have witnessed those members being displaced for months at a time and exceeding the limits of what response agencies such as EMBC are capable of and have not followed through with. So what we're witnessing is the communities themselves are dealing with their elected members and their administration are dealing with the long-term financial effects of having to deal with their community members to ensure that they feel comfortable, safe, and that they are well attended to. And when it comes to the other aspects from the First Nations Leadership Council for British Columbia, they are currently developing an action plan to be able to alleviate a lot of this work by increasing the amount of funding that comes through finesse in the event of larger incidents that come down in the future. So with the wildfires slowly increasing and with Environment Canada predicting, in particular BC, multiple heat domes, we can only anticipate more natural disasters that Finesse is uniquely lining ourselves up to be able to be that response agency for First Nations communities in British Columbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. We'll now proceed with a round of questions, and I have Ms. Stubbs up first for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Let me just start by saying, Anthony Moore, I think that many of us can only dream of being as comprehensive and articulate as you were, speaking primarily extemporaneously and, as you said, on short notice. Thank you for your testimony. Dr. Lackenbauer, I noticed that you, when you focused your remarks to threats in the Arctic itself, I want to thank you for that and for the additional information you gave. I wonder if you would, in this part, touch on what you believe to be the top threats or connected priorities through the Arctic and to the Arctic.
Thank you. I'd be delighted to. When I think of threats through the Arctic, so threats that emanate from outside of the Canadian Arctic region and would pass through or over the region to strike at targets outside of the Arctic, I see these as inextricably linked to continental defense writ large. So I think it's important for the language that when we're talking about North American defense threats, we're focusing then on great power competition. We're looking at what's playing out with non-like-minded states, competitors like China and Russia, and looking at what primarily is going on in the technological domain, what they're doing with next generation ICBMs, with hypersonic glide vehicle warheads on them, what we're looking at in terms of advanced cruise missiles. The Arctic factors into this because some of the sensor systems that we need, detection systems, and also some of our intercept capabilities working in partnership with our allies, particularly the United States, are deployed in the Arctic. And as we've made commitments to increase our military presence, a lot of that is going to relate to sensor systems and domain awareness that serves a broader integrated deterrence mission. Emphasis here is, I think that a lot of these are military threats passing through the region. When I go and I say conventional military or nuclear military threats, which we have a long history of balancing, when I think of threats to the Arctic, I don't see these as primarily falling within the conventional military domain. There are military threats. There's cyber threats. There's competition going on in the information domain. There are below the threshold of armed conflict competition threats that are playing out now and will continue, I think, to play out in the years ahead. But I think a lot of the threats to the Arctic relate to possible malicious intent associated with foreign direct investment. It could be foreign scientific research practices that have intentions that aren't what they appear to be on the surface. They can relate to attempts by foreign actors to influence proper democratic discussions that we're having as Canadians about Arctic priorities. The primary threat, however, to our Arctic is climate change. And that's a threat that unfortunately we can't address at just an Arctic level. It requires global action, but it is certainly a threat multiplier. It's a threat amplifier and a crisis multiplier for those of us who are responding to exigencies in the North, and really is a complicating factor.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I think many Canadians and probably elected representatives as well would be maybe skeptical and surprised at the possibility that there could be real potential security threats from foreign actors to the Arctic and to Canada in general, although academics and experts like yourself, as well as DND associated experts and certainly security intelligence officials in Canada have been sounding the same alarms. What would be your view in terms of the level of preparation militarily and defense-wise to prepare or to mitigate those threats? And what would you see, say, as the top priorities that should be addressed, and what are the main barriers?
Great. Well, thank you. Excellent questions. First of all, I would suggest that we need to be very clear in identifying what we see as particular Arctic vulnerabilities that are beyond the capacity of our national solutions or allied solutions to meet these threats. I think often we treat everything Arctic as if it is inherently different from the suite of risks, threats that we face across Canada. So I think the first set of questions to ask, what is specifically Arctic about those threats? And then it's to assess whether or not we have the right capabilities and, most importantly, relationships to be able to meet those. In terms of immediate term priorities, I think it's improving our domain awareness. It's our situational awareness of what is happening within our Arctic and recognizing that a lot of the activity is not going to be overt and it's not going to be military. It's not going to take the form of a conventional challenge to our sovereignty, which is something that we love to fixate on. I think a lot more of these challenges are competition for narratives. It's trying to shape what we want to be as a country, what our opportunities are for leadership domestically and internationally within the Arctic, and ensuring that we have the right relationships, not only across government departments and agencies, but across governments, and must be centered on Northerners first and foremost as the most important source of information in detecting a lot of anomalies in the environmental and human space. Who better than Northerners themselves to determine if something is out of the ordinary in the conversations going on in Facebook or with people coming to their communities and interacting in strange ways?
Thank you very much, Ms. Stubbs. We'll now go to Ms. Atwin. Ms. Atwin, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging I'm speaking to you all in the unceded, unsurrendered Wolastoq Galyag territory here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and it's also purple shirt for Clean Water Day here in New Brunswick as well. So I'd like to just maybe start with Mr. Lackenbauer. We're going to you a lot tonight, but I appreciate your testimony today. You mentioned the importance of discerning lessons after a disaster, and I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the key lessons that have been learned, perhaps over the last 5 years or even 2 years, because it's been such a tumultuous time. So thank you if you could highlight those.
Yes, absolutely. A wonderful question. I think I'm going to refer, if it's appropriate, to a particular initiative I've undertaken with my team and many of the first responders in the Kitikmeot region of the Central Arctic within Nunavut through a Kitikmeot Search and Rescue Roundtable. And again, I'm speaking then or reporting on behalf of some of these real subject matter experts, the practitioners on the ground in identifying challenges. What they're seeing, and this also relates to some of the COVID activities, an increasing caseload of demands on first responders' time. It relates to changing environmental conditions, loss of land safety knowledge, food insecurity, hunters fishers taking greater risks on the land. When I say land, I'm meaning sea, ice, and land, if we're speaking in an Inuit Nunangat context here. They talk about gaps in training or coordination of training across different organizations that they belong to. Some of the shortages of equipment that would enable them to do their jobs better. Concerns about volunteer burnout, that with the same group of people often being turned to and asked to come out, it eventually drains their energy. Lack of mental and physical health supports for responders, overly burdensome administrative requirements, reporting requirements for people who are volunteering, and then difficulty coordinating, cooperating, and communicating across the community, territorial, provincial, regional, and federal levels. One of the other areas that they've often raised is slow response times from southern-based search and rescue assets, which begs the question of what types of assets then should be pre-deployed in the north in terms of federal assets, or how much more can we go and build that resiliency, support capacity building efforts on the local level to bolster that local ability to respond or regional ability to respond to these as a made in the north and by the north solution.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'd like to admit, I'm ashamed to say that I didn't know a lot about the Canadian Rangers. So this is such an important opportunity, I think, for us as parliamentarians, but also for Canadians. So maybe just to kind of flip that question to the other side is, can you celebrate some of the successes of the Canadian Rangers program and what we can learn from this as far as ensuring that it's kind of, a sustainable program that is, supported with the resources that it needs?
Thank you. Oh my gosh, that's my dream question. It wasn't pre-planted, I promise. Rangers, as I mentioned, are often described as the eyes and ears of the North. I love to add in the eyes, ears, and voice in remote regions, as the late Peter Kunalese, a ranger from Clyde River, Nunavut, once described them. So Rangers are part of the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves. They are members of the military serving, but in a distinct form of service from our regular forces or our primary reservists. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the Rangers. Many of you were probably in the house when we announced the Year of the Ranger, which is wonderful. Since May of 1947, they've provided lightly equipped, self-sufficient mobile forces that support a whole range of national security and public safety operations. So they'll conduct patrols within their homeland, a way of showing the flag, but also sharing knowledge amongst one another, report unusual activities or sightings, collect local information that's relevant to the military and other partners, often work with other members of the military and members of other departments and agencies involved in domestic operations. A lot of high-profile involvement in assistance to search and rescue efforts, which in many ranger patrols, particularly in the provinces, is very much the bread and butter of what they do. And then assisting in a direct way with natural disasters like forest fires, floods, in pandemic response, being interlocutors or liaison people within their community, knowing which elders, probably should be the priority for evacuation or movement to a central location, who requires assistance with breathing and therefore needs to get to the community center with the generator first, speaking the language, offering that reassurance. So an incredible group of 5,000 Canadians living in more than 220 communities across the country, the majority of whom are Indigenous, and Rangers speak, official statement is 26 different languages and dialects, many Indigenous. So in my mind, a wonderful example of what we can do when we harness this tremendous capacity that we have in our communities that resides in our Indigenous peoples, and really a great example of how diversity and inclusion is truly a force multiplier for our military and for our first responders.
Thank you, Ms. Atwin. We'll now go to Monsieur Sainte-Marie. Monsieur Sainte-Marie, vous avez...
Mr. Sainte-Marie, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so thank you, Mr. Moore and Mr. Lockenbauer, for being here today. My first questions are for Mr. Moore. When it's a question of resilience and to response to emergency situations, some witnesses often mentioned, in the context of our study here, the importance of including the communities themselves in their interventions. Often the communities act as first respondents, first people who come to action when there's an emergency situation. What do you think of that? What can you say about the actions of community service during emergency situations? Is a collaboration good with other services? Is the knowledge that the communities have of their own territory is used in the best way? How can you make sure that all the responders have the best resources available to ensure their resilience? Thank you.
So when it comes to communities themselves and having their responders be involved, that's in emergency management, one of the early preparedness statutes that we work with each community to ensure that they're able to. So for the first 72 hours, as an example, we ask those communities to be able to handle themselves while we prepare for the larger scale response of whatever incident it is. And when it comes to the PREOCs, the Provincial Regional Emergency Coordination Centers, or the Emergency Operation Centers themselves, for each of those individual incidents, we are asking that those communities that are impacted bring somebody who has that local knowledge of where they are to the Emergency Operations Center because of that local knowledge. So if there's, for example, a huge wildfire rolling through a community that is impacting 2 or 3 communities, we ask them to send a representative to the Emergency Operations Center, where we, Finesse, also have a representative, a technical specialist, that work together with those communities to identify their specific interests that they wish to protect, whether it's a specific house or a specific cultural site, or even something as simple as a grave sites. When we have that information, we're able to plug that in both to our internal system, which we use Lightship. It's a very vast online mapping tool that allows us to input information on the fly with any device, a cell phone, an iPad, or a laptop, using GPS coordinates that usually are pretty accurate with these when we have other instruments available. And having them take part in training, as another example, with our Lightship and what we call our strike teams. We go out into those communities and make sure we map out and GPS those specific sites that they've identified for us, and send in other teams such as structure protection units, as an example, for a threat of a wildfire, or tiger dams in the event of flooding. We have trailers identified for each type of incident that would occur. So for our strike teams, we have cargo trailers outfitted with fire smart mitigation tools, so vegetation and moving things away from the home to keep the home safe. We have flood mitigation car trailers with tiger dams and other sorts of damming or redirecting for water. And we utilize all this equipment in conjunction with those communities and those specific community members to be able to try to protect everything that they have identified to us.
Merci beaucoup. C'est très intéressant.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. Another topic that I also find very interesting, it's the lack of plan for recovery. Often we're talking about preparation and intervention, but rarely about the recovery. So, in your opinion, what could be done by the federal government to support recovery better? Thank you.
Still one that we are, I think this came on a bit late, so that's a great question. One of the pillars that we have identified as Finesse is recovery itself. It's its own pillar, right? So we have identified a emergency management specialist. He was our emergency manager prior, and we've actually tasked him to the recovery specialist branch of our society, and trying to figure out the best way to handle recovery in First Nations communities. And I think when it comes to what the federal government can do to support that is three things. So funding for recovery specialists. It's not something that you can go and go to a university and get trained for. It's most of the time it's a boots on the ground type of thing. You meeting with the communities and figuring out what they need to do and find ways to get those done. So using Lytton as an example, where the fire came through from CN Rail, we're trying to figure out what we can do for the community members who are still displaced, and trying to find a way to get them home, trying to find a way to get them out of whatever situation they're in, where they've been moved 4 or 5 times now since this event has occurred because of each of the timelines of the response agencies, whether it's EMBC or the Red Cross or the community administration themselves. Another part I think might be able to support is bringing in other specialists, whether it's from outside of the province or other agencies that do work like this. I don't recall a lot at this particular time that specialize in recovery, but there is a lot of coordination that needs to occur between construction companies, for example, or builders, electricians, things like that, ground stability specialists, and so on. The list goes on forever, depending on the emergency. And the last thing that we have discussed in our board meetings with Finesse is trying to have that structure to be able to respond to multiple areas at the same time. Right now, we only have 2 main offices, one in North Vancouver and one in Kamloops. And what we are trying to do is establish offices, or at least response offices, regionally throughout the province. And there's been discussions of expanding even beyond that. But when it comes to coordination of resources, regardless of which pillar we're in, whether it's mitigation, preparedness, or recovery, and so on, the idea is to minimize the amount of time between where we get the call, where they have an incident, to where we transition from the mitigating the incident itself to starting to plan for recovery. And that takes place, the sooner that takes place, the better chances we have of reducing the amount of time the family is displaced from their homes.
Merci, Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
For 6 minutes.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. Very informative. Anthony Moore, you mentioned you did a opening statement in your own language. That made me feel happy. Thank you.
To I don't know how to say his last name, Lackenbauer, in English, because I have too many questions to try and get through them. In Inuktitut, I always feel like I lose time asking questions in Inuktitut, but I have too many. So my first question, I'll get right to the point. First of all, do you mind if I don't know what P stands for. Professor Lackenbauer, I really appreciated that you mentioned names of people that I know in Nunavut, so thank you for sharing those names. I'll get right to it. Can you describe the investments that have been made for Canadian Rangers?
Yes, thanks, Ms. Outlook. I'd love to. So the Canadian Rangers have seen increases in their overall budget across Canada over the last 20 years. So we have seen their budget. I think it's, again, there'd be experts from the Department of National Defense who could provide you with exact figures, but I think the operating budget for all 5 patrol groups is about $35 million, if I was a good listener. They are currently undergoing a review, a Canadian Ranger Enhancement Program, which is following up on one of the commitments in Strong, Secure, Engage, so Canada's 2017 defense policy. And I'm going to make sure I quote it here because the language was particular. It committed to enhancing and expanding the training and effectiveness of the Canadian Rangers to improve their functional capabilities within the Canadian Armed Forces. What this emphasizes is a requirement to support the Rangers organization as a metric of success, not simply increasing numbers. Sometimes there's a disposition to measure that things are better if they're bigger. I think a lot of the what I'm hearing from Nunavummiut, for example, is that it's ensuring investments going forward are providing Rangers with the training opportunities that they require to make sure that the Ranger instructors who go and work with them at the community level are able to go and do so on a regular basis. There's also movements right now to revisit the equipment usage rate, which is paid to Rangers for using their personal vehicles and equipment while they're out doing official taskings as Rangers. This is something that Rangers, for the most part, very much appreciate, because by being able to invest that money in their own equipment, they don't have to ask permission to take it out when they want to go berry picking or go fishing. It's their equipment they use that the military almost pays them this money almost like rent. But there's revisiting whether or not the amount is enough. And I think there's an expectation that that amount will go up. Another very recent development is ensuring that Rangers qualify and are paid for isolation allowance, depending on which individual community they're in, to make sure that, like anybody else working in those communities, that their Ranger pay is supplemented by an acknowledgement of the cost of living in those individual communities. So I'd suggest those are some of the either past investments or areas right now of focus. I also think that there has been quite a bit of investment in the Junior Canadian Rangers program. So this is a program supported by the Rangers. Junior Canadian Rangers are children between the ages of 12 and 18. Very representative of the North, very representative of their communities in terms of who's going in, roughly equal number of young women and young men in the Junior Canadian Rangers, which is also interesting, but a significant investment as well in ensuring that that youth program, which is supported by the military, is flourishing. So I hope, Ms. Outlook, that addresses that question a bit.
Absolutely. You answered a portion of my second question already, so I'll change what I was going to ask as my second question into asking you to make a recommendation as to how can we as a committee ensure that we make a recommendation that does increase those investments, because I do frequently hear from my constituents that as volunteers, that when they have to use their own capital like snowmobiles and boats, quote, I guess, rental is not sufficient when when those capital items are so expensive and the cost to repair them is so expensive. So what kind of recommendation would you make to ensure that that is increased sufficiently to meet the needs of the Canadian Rangers?
I think taking what you just said and turning it into an affirmative statement is one I would support completely. That it's really important in light of inflation right now and in light of costs of living and realizing the importance of the Rangers, especially in this year of the Ranger, that we really see this as an investment in communities, an investment in families, and an investment in subject matter expertise that's really meaningful. I think at the same time, it's also increasing the budget envelope available for Ranger training and Ranger pay. And another one that, if I've been a good listener at the community level, I've often heard is Rangers really want challenging training opportunities. And that also means having ranger instructors who are able to go in sufficient numbers to work with them. So I think a specific recommendation was making sure that the Canadian Army is treating ranger instructors as a priority, and that investing in ranger instructors who in turn support the Canadian Rangers themselves is an investment in Arctic sovereignty. It's an investment in security. It's an investment in safety, and it's ultimately an investment in communities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Lout. No problem. We'll go to a second round now, a shortened one. I have Mr. Schmale up for 5 minutes.
You do. Perfect. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. I might continue on with the professor if I could. Great to have a professor from Trent University there. I'm coming to you from Lindsay, Ontario, so just a little bit down the road. So appreciate your contribution. I think you're in Peterborough. I'm going to guess you're in Peterborough. Yes, you are. Okay, perfect. All right. Maybe I will pick up on a comment you made, I think, in your conversation to Ms. Stubbs. And I think I heard it correctly, but please correct me if I'm wrong. You talked about threats that don't look like what most are used to or appear like foreign investment or research initiatives on the surface, but might have other objectives. Did I hear that correctly? And what did you mean by that? Could you expand on it?
Absolutely. So here I'm referencing, as Canada, we have often welcomed foreign direct investment in several sectors of our economy, non-renewable resource extraction being prime among them. There have been concerns expressed about what foreign direct investment from non-like-minded state sources might mean in terms of Arctic sovereignty and security. So the clear example is the Shandong Gold's attempted acquisition of the TMAC Hope Bay mine that was blocked on national security grounds by the federal government. So that would be an example of concerns about foreign-owned companies or companies backed by foreign state-owned banks developing a toehold in strategic parts of the Canadian economy in the Arctic or strategic locations in the Arctic, potentially acquiring infrastructure. This is not a unique challenge set facing Canada. Other Arctic states are balancing off the same considerations. Another relates to activities of foreign scientific actors. So say a research icebreaker operating in Canadian Arctic waters and us wanting to make sure that the research being conducted is actually that which has been approved and that the findings of that research are being released transparently as is required under international law. Also concerns about whether or not that particular practice is really pursuing the research for what it's claiming to be doing, or whether or not it's being done for practice, say, gathering bathymetric hydrographic data about the seabed in anticipation of future activities by that actor. Not trying to be too cryptic here, and I hope I'm not being, so please push back if I am. But again, I think these are, at this stage, they're risks, and I think that we've done a fairly good job of managing them. But we need to remain vigilant. And here's where it's very important for us to be mobilizing all the different sources we have of information, be they different sensor systems, be they the information being gathered at our marine security operations centers on the coasts, synthesizing information, but also really making sure we have those connections with northern rights holders and stakeholders who are often being, or have in the past often been approached with some of these opportunities, and in turn, really must be reassured that they have the support of Canada as a whole in dealing with some of this uncertainty, particularly around foreign direct investment. And I think it also requires the federal government, if it's going to step in and block certain initiatives on national security grounds, to be prepared to also step up with some of those strategic investments. And I know, Minister Garneau, you in your former hat as Minister of Transport were overseeing a lot of the work being done in terms of transformative transportation infrastructure investments and what those could enable in the north. All of those investments, I think, also have a benefit in allowing us to increase our ability to sense what's going on within the region at the same time as improving resupply, improving health of communities, and serving as a catalyst for more diversified economic development.
Thank you for those comments. Very impressive resume, by the way, Professor. It makes me wonder what I've done with my life. you talked about we've talked about China, or sorry, Russia a bit, but also I believe if I heard correctly, you mentioned China and their interest in the region. Should China be treated the same as Russia, or is kind of Russia still the I guess it's safe to call it threat to the Arctic?
Thank you. I think that is an absolutely core question that not enough people are asking. I think they're different threats. Both, and again, threat is even a strong language when we're thinking about to the Canadian Arctic. Certainly in light of the absolutely atrocious war that Russia has launched on Ukraine in 2014 and further accelerated in the last few months, my trust level for Russia is very, very low. I think within a Canadian Arctic context, however, it's not particularly coveting our resources. And in essence, there are some natural alignments in our concerns about certain changes to status of shipping routes in terms of access for international transit traffic and so on. So I actually don't think within a Canadian Arctic context, Russia is primarily a competitor. They are in terms of a North American defense and defense of Europe and our allies and NATO, absolutely an urgent challenge that needs to be met and that we are meeting with our allies. But I don't see them as a primary threat in the Canadian Arctic or to the Canadian Arctic or in the Canadian Arctic. For China and its interests, I do not see it as, at this stage, primarily a military threat. I see it primarily a risk relating to foreign direct investment, clarity in terms of what China's interests are within the region, and also scientific activities as a way of normalizing the presence of a country that has self-declared itself to be a near-Arctic state, suggesting that somehow gives it a status somewhat close to that of Arctic states, but has no bearing in international law or the international order. So I don't think that China inherently is an adversary in the Arctic, and it's not necessarily best to jump ahead and frame it as such in a specific Arctic context. But I think we have to be thinking and be vigilant in how we're looking at China as both a potential collaborator on certain initiatives like mitigating global climate change, but at the same time, an economic competitor and a strategic competitor in a global context, and what that means in terms of our relationships in the Arctic.
Thank you, Mr. Schmale. We'll now go to Mr. Weiler. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses for joining today, both on short notice, as well as for your very thoughtful and energetic testimony so far. My first question through you, Mr. Chair, will be for Finesse. Given that Finesse's work is throughout BC, I was hoping you could share with this community what proportion of British Columbia's 204 Indigenous communities currently have emergency plans in place.
So for the communities that we've been dealing with, emergency plans really vary, right? So there's all hazards plans, there's hazard specific plans, and we've been working with probably about 150 of them. A lot of them are grouped together because of geography. So Lower Nikolai, as an example, there's probably 5 or 6 communities that are really close together, like 2-minute drive between the communities. When it comes to the north, though, there's very few communities that have a wholesome plan. And if they do have a plan, they rarely have the capacity to have a full-time emergency coordinator to be able to implement said plan. With that being said, we have been working as Finesse with our emergency department, or what we're labeling as our mitigation department, to try coordinate with those communities that don't have a plan and supply them with one. And it's been a little difficult at this point because of some of them are still dealing with COVID, for example. They haven't opened up their community for us to come in. We have many other supports that we're also trying to provide with them by way of wildfire training and mitigation and planning, things like that, as well as structure fire. And when it comes to the communities that do have a plan, there's probably about 15 to 20 off the top of my head that have an emergency coordinator to go along with these plans, a full-time position. A lot of times we're finding, even if they have a plan, it's sitting in a binder in somebody's desk or on a bookshelf that sits there for 5 or 6 years and rarely gets opened up. So we're trying to communicate with these communities and bring them an emergency specialist or an emergency officer. We've increased our capacity to be able to do this by hiring about 4 or 5 extra officers to be able to go to these communities and work with them. We've even built EOC kits for those communities that don't have a plan in place, and we have sort of a all-hazards super generic plan to at least get them in the right direction and what they should be thinking about. But there's so much work that still needs to be done.
Thank you for that. And I can imagine it may be difficult to kind of take a plan off the shelf, but in situations like that, it's certainly better than not having a plan at all. But maybe I just want to continue on that topic a little bit. I mean, we talked quite a bit about response here, but I'd be very curious if you could explain to this committee a little bit more about the work that you're doing on mitigation and on fuel management, and if you had any recommendations for this committee on how the federal government could better partner with Finesse to be able to assist in these types of services.
So we do a lot of work in mitigation, especially when it comes to wildfire. We have on-reserve fuel funding grants that communities are able to apply for, but it's only a maximum of $75,000 if they prove that they are high risk. And what we're finding is through each of the communities that we deal with, through their community wildfire protection plans, if they have one in place already, it's out of date by 7, 8, 12 years. And doing those, you need a registered forestry professional to go in and physically walk through each community, through the exterior of it, and determine what the hazard level it is based on their findings, how deep the duff layer is, what type of trees are there, what type of vegetation is, and how healthy it is. Determine all of those factors, determine how high risk that community is. And when it comes to what supports that can be improved is the increase in funding that these communities can apply for to be able to get this work done. So as an example, just updating a community wildfire protection plan with a registered forestry professional, it's based on the amount of hectares that person does. I just did it this last year with 2 of my 4 communities. I can only afford to do 2, with the Nisga'a Nation where I work. And that work cost me $47,000 for this RPF to come through and determine exactly what we knew, but we had to get an RPF stamp of approval on it, that we are high risk in those 2 communities. Following that, we needed to apply for fuel treatment. Finesse does a lot of that fuel treatment work and can coordinate with communities on how to get it done. They do lots of training and have the capacity in some instances to be able to go to the community and conduct that work. But it does cost a lot of money. It's about $2,000 per hectare, give or take, in the Okanagan, and about $8,000 per hectare in the Northwest where I live, because the area. If you live in the Okanagan, you drive through and you can see the ground everywhere you go. There's trees maybe 6 to 10 meters apart on a regular basis, whereas where I live in the Northwest, just about an hour north of Terrace, the trees I have to walk sideways through. I have to crawl, climb over. The work that we did, as an example, for 8 square hectares took 5 months of work to do for 20 guys. So it varies in the amount of time and the amount of funds it takes for each of these areas. And I'm not even talking about the Northeast. I'm not talking about the Vancouver area or the interior, central interior of British Columbia, where all these topographies are very different. There's some areas that are completely flat with rolling hills, and we have mountains shooting out of the lakes and rivers where we live, where we have an 80% incline to get to the top, and we're supposed to clear as the raven flies, like flat on a map, a certain amount of area. So it's very difficult to say what can Canada do in partnership with Finesse, but that hopefully gives you a little bit of insight in the issues and the various types of issues. To be able to answer that question wholesomely requires a little more technical explanation, that we probably don't have time for here, but increased funding for these areas that Finesse has already established, such as the on-reserve fuel funding or the Community Resiliency Investment Grant, and things like that, to be able to conduct large-scale work over multi-years instead of reapplying once a year after year after year, because grants themselves are very incumbent on the people that apply for them. It requires a lot of reporting throughout, and especially in the final reporting, a lot of labor-intensive coordination in all the documents and photographs and GPS spatial data and things like this to be able to prove we did work there. So hopefully that answers your question. I tried to break it down as easy as I could.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Weiler. Monsieur Sainte-Marie, pour 2 minutes et demie.
Mr. Sainte-Marie, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So another question for Mr. Moore. Related to his recent answers, and also related to the answers that he gave me in his previous, when I asked him questions previously. He mentioned the importance of having a response office in every region. I would like to know, in his opinion, for the response strategies, how important is it that they be modulated as a function of every community, every region, rather than having a uniform approach everywhere? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
With very different geographic tendencies. So when we talk about breaking down our offices, because we have, as I mentioned, we have 2 main offices, and they're primarily southern BC, and strategically placed because of those hazards that typically are there. But when it comes to the floods, the fires that occur throughout the province, when we tried to get in the past resources from, say, Vancouver, because that's where we keep our flood equipment, storage issues is always a big issue right now. Trying to get them to the north when the Okanagan is flooding, it's difficult to get past those areas. Last year was a perfect example over this past November when the entire south was cut off, the entire Metro Vancouver. So all of our resources, which is in North Van, could not get anywhere beyond that. And the equipment that we have in Kamloops is more geared towards wildfire. So it didn't have the flood response equipment necessary to be able to support those communities. So that's one of the reasons why we are trying to work towards having, similar to what the regional districts have for their regions, or what EMBC breaks out for regions. Also BC Wildfire, they all have broken down very similar to the Northwest, the Northeast, the Cariboo Central Interior, the South, and the Metro Vancouver, and Vancouver Island. This plan and allows us to coordinate our personnel and our equipment to be able to respond to any community. So let's say there's more fires in Kamloops area, but North Kamloops. and there's north communities on the other side that we can't get to. We can bring resources down from Prince George area, as an example, and support those communities, or vice versa. And having that ability and that capacity to be able to respond from multiple angles or pull in multiple resources, as BC Wildfire uses this model as well. So if there's a lot of fire going on in Kamloops, they pull their resources from the Skeena district where I live and from the central interior, Bulkley Valley interior to the south, leaving minimal resources up there because there's nothing going on, so that they can all move to where the hazards really are and impacting communities. So that's basically what we're trying to do, is mimic what successful regional offices have already established.
I'm sorry, the chair has been disconnected. Mr. Schmale, could you take over?
I can, yes. I don't have the time. I wasn't.
There's only one more person left, and that's Ms. Idlout to ask another question, the last question.
Okay, I will start the time now. Ms. Idlout, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Schmale. I'm going to complete my line of questioning that I had for Lackenbauer. Just for comparison's sake, I wanted to ask you, do members of the military have to use their own capital when they do operations in the north?
Great, thank you for the question. So again, it will depend on which members of the military, because the Rangers are, just a form of reservist. So for regular force members and primary reservists, they are actually expected to use military equipment and vehicles that are provided to them. The logic being that they are expected to be standardized and that the system will procure the equipment that everyone will use. For the Rangers, the logic is that because each community's needs are different, it would be overwhelming on the military system and probably not the most effective for the Rangers themselves to have the system provide them with that. So in essence, the model has always been, if Rangers living in their communities are best attuned to what the needs are to operate in their areas, perhaps they can choose what vehicles are best, what forms of equipment are best, what type of tent is best to use, and instead the military will then compensate them for using that equipment. And as I was alluding to before, what I see as one of the primary benefits is it allows individuals to actually acquire equipment that they own, that they don't have to turn and ask permission from the military to go and use when they want to go out with their families or travel to another community, which to me is one of the big differences, say, from the Coast Guard Auxiliary, where through the small boats program, they've been provided with very capable marine search and rescue boats, but members of the Coast Guard Auxiliary are not allowed to go and use those boats to go beluga hunting or to go narwhal hunting. Those same individuals, if they go out in their personal boat as a ranger, are paid for the use of that boat while they're using it as a ranger. And then in turn, when they take off their ranger hat and their hoodie and they want to go out and catch a whale, they can do so, and it's their personal equipment. So sorry, I kind of jumped ahead with your question there.
No, that's okay.
But it's one of those reasons that no, the Rangers is a different form of service.
No, thank you. I do.
That was your 2.5 minutes.
Yes. Was it seriously? Could I ask one more question?
The chair will, so...
Thank you so much, Jamie.
Mr. Garneau's...
Well, he's gone very quickly. Could you could provide us just a little bit more information on that recommendation that you mentioned about the that new job that you suggested, so that we could understand how important that recommendation you suggested is?
Great, thank you. So this is a proposal that I've actually put forth with Peter Kickert, Calvin Peterson, who you're going to hear from next week, based on conversations in the Kitikmeot region with other Nunavummiut rights holders, stakeholders, first responders, recognizing strengthening community safety as a central priority along the lines that my fellow panelists has identified. And As we conceive of it, this program would provide communities with 2 or more full-time public safety officers who would be responsible for search and rescue, all hazards, emergency management, fire prevention, land and marine safety, and if required, emergency medical services. So it would be about creating a program to build off local knowledge, Inuit, Kaujamakanji community relationships of officers while providing for the space to develop new capabilities. So having a central individual in each community in Inuit Nunangat who could serve as this hub, this focal point in terms of coordinating efforts of all the different first responders and gratefully break down the silos of responsibility that exist across agencies responsible for community and safety and security in the North. So treating this almost like it's a community resilience hub. Perhaps there'd even be multi-purpose buildings constructed to function as centers for community safety activities for all those different groups at the community level. And there are other models out there. You can look at what the Cree have set up in EU ISCHI territory for public safety officers, the Katavik Civil Security Department in Nunavik, and Village Public Safety Officer programs in Alaska with similar models in Yukon Northwest Territories. We see this as a great opportunity of really enabling and coordinating a lot of those community level efforts. Happy to provide more information to the committee in writing if you're interested.
All right, perfect. Thank you, witnesses. That was the good extra time. Probably because you might be a constituent of mine, so that's you could have went a little longer actually. But thank you to our witnesses for coming to the meeting and contributing to this process. We have a very interesting study to go on. I'm assuming the chair is not back on. I can't see in my hall.
He is back on.
I just
he's
got
back on.
but I know it was ably handled in my absence.
Well, remarkably adequate is what I'd like to say, but it's all you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. As Mr. Schmale was saying, this is an important study, and we very much appreciate both Professor Lackenbauer and also Mr. Moore for giving us your insights on some very important issues. Very much appreciate taking the time for today's meeting. With that, this panel is concluded, and just for the benefit of the members of the committee, we will probably be presenting our housing study report as early as Monday, now that it has been approved. And secondly, this morning at the liaison committee subcommittee, our travel budget was approved. So I just wanted you to know that. And with that, we'll be meeting next Tuesday at 3:30. Thank you very much, everyone. And this meeting is adjourned.